Welcome to Nerds and Friends. Today we have Will Shaw and Carey DuVal joining myself, Josh Lindquist.
Hi,
And
Josh
today,
Lindquist.
hi, Carey DuVal. Today we
Hello,
are going,
everyone.
yes, hello, Will Shaw, and hello, everyone. Today we are going to talk about the writing process as it relates to rewrites. And once you've got a draft down, revisiting your work, what that kind of looks like for everyone. Because I know for me, that's probably my weakest point as a writer. I think it's the part that I look forward to the least, and I think it's the part that I need to spend more time on to become better at.
Interesting.
That's
Well,
that's the topic today.
well, as far as like the topic goes, if I can ask the first question, then what is it about rewriting that is that makes you not like it that much?
I think deep down it's a fear that I've crafted something that makes sense with my first draft, and I'm worried if I go and change things, it'll have other ramifications I won't notice, and I'll end up
Uh,
making it worse. So it's like when you're painting and you're afraid to add more because you're like, if I fuck this up,
mhm.
it's like that. It's a fear of making changes that make it worse as opposed to better.
Control Z.
Yeah, it's like when you go to
Yes.
clean something and you clean like one spot and then you realize how dirty everything else is.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Yep. That's interesting thing about that, because I actually kind of have the I've had the opposite with the writing that I've been doing recently. Um, I really like the rewriting because I of the way that things tend to flesh out in my head, because I'll have like a through line. So let me just I'll just talk about the book I'm writing. When I first wrote 75,000 words of this thing, I had a bunch of events, but no spine of the story. Like, I knew what wanted to happen. I really liked the ending, but I didn't have like what the story was. And I had a lot. Like there was basically too much. And I was trying to go a lot of flashbacks, kind of Tarantino style, to build the character. And I realized I liked the flashback mechanic for the way that the story worked. And basically I just re-outlined it, and I talked to Will, and we kind of just could nail down. I was like, hey, like this is like there's this big chunk of the story that's like interesting, but it doesn't move the narrative forward at all. And it actually kind of like stagnates it in a way, because it would make this like way over long. And uh basically after all that, I sat down at the beginning of November and I started writing. And the first, again, like I had all the stuff I'd written. I basically didn't pull a whole lot of it out, and I started writing entirely new stuff to
Mhm.
make to make the story more in the tone and to have more fun
Mhm.
in the way. And I realized that there were parts of the story that I kind of glossed over that were actually real important for characterization. And I'm still like, I guess I'm technically in a second draft. I would consider this the first draft, because like I want to come out, this is going to come out as like at a bare minimum a complete story the whole way through.
Right.
But every time I come up with something that has ramifications either later in the story or earlier, if what I've written, as opposed to like, what I do is I go back, and in red text at the top of that chapter, I put bullet points of, this is something that this character needs. Like,
That's smart.
for example, if I can keep running with this, um, over time, I figured that the main character would have a fear of fire, because his specific traumatic event involves a whole town burning down around him. And I came up with that, and I was 12, 13 chapters in. And in like chapter 3 or 4, he uses a torch to, light a gunpowder barrel that explodes, kind of, musketeer style, and allows him to escape a prison. And I realized like he he'd be fucking afraid of that. So like I wrote out a note. I'm not going to rewrite the chapter yet, but I wrote out a note at the top of the chapter, like, Watcher can't be the one that lights the barrel, because he's at this point he's afraid of fire.
Mhm.
So that becomes a new like turning point in that.
Totally. That's so you're putting in the work to do it right, which is something I'm afraid to do because I do like my first draft, and so it's like, yeah, going back and doing all that extra work. I think I really need to do it. I think it's really going to add more to the story. The first stuff I'm getting back about my second book, Galgathor's Gambit, is that people are saying there wasn't enough character development for some of the characters.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to go back and add more and not be afraid of, okay, if I go and add an extra chapter for this character, I can go back to another chapter that kind of bridges that gap and take out some of the stuff at the beginning and get surgical with it, make it perfect. So
yeah, and like that's how you can make something bulletproof. And I can kind of like I think I can relate this to what Will's kind of shown me about drawing, because what I've learned, the way that I really like I really liked sketching is when I get kind of a general pose down. I don't know if you guys ever read this book, but there was an old drawing book that Stan Lee and I think Steve Ditko did, which was How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way.
Yes.
And they had all these different styles, and they had this, like, you can do the bubble and skeleton style, or you can flesh things out, which was basically like, and there was this really cool way that Steve Ditko just, like, he kind of made a scribble that was like vaguely the shape of a dude, and then he just kind of like filled it in, and all of a sudden it was Thor. Like,
whoa.
Like he fleshed out the whole thing. He just scribbled out the general shape, and then he outlined it, and then he took away the lines with a kneaded eraser, and then you had, Thor in a pose, and he used that to, like, give himself kind of like some meat to work with. And while I don't do that exactly with sketching, I like that as like I think that's a good metaphor for sketching and writing. And I was wondering if Will could, like, expand on that in his process.
Yeah, as far as like the editing process, I don't edit my own writing because I'm terrible at writing, but I really like to help.
You have good story
help
ideas.
other people rewrite.
Yeah. I would absolutely love to, like, co-author something with you, Will, because I love your ideas so much.
Yeah.
And even though you feel like you don't have a whole lot of confidence in your writing, I would love to be like that mouthpiece to your art, which would be cool. So that's just me being at work. So,
well, see, that's the thing, is I'm really good at, like, coming up with, like, characters or background elements, or thinking over themes, or overthinking, like, plots, but I'm really bad at the actual part of writing. It's more of I'm great at the concept and the world building, but the actual writing of a narrative I'm really terrible at. Which
surprises me because you're
illustration.
Oh, sorry. Well, which surprises me because you have such a great grasp of narrative structure, and the way that things rhyme, or the way that things fit together, or you've got this great knowledge of tropes and mythology, and so that's I'm interested in that. I'd be interested in maybe a like an art piece from you that told a story with no words. Like, I feel like, because I've seen that done before. I used to follow this guy's art. His name is Dan Levisi, and he's a fantastic digital painter, and he made this big scrapbook, and it was Last Man Standing, Kill Book of a Bounty Hunter. And, like, he had this whole world that he had taken, and he had made this, like, absolutely bonkers, like, hyper colorized, but like also fantastically detailed world. But I don't think it ever became like a comic, but he did so much interesting world building, and he built, like, all this background basically almost entirely through visuals, that it's just such an interesting piece to me. It's almost like it's like an experimental film, kind of.
Wow.
Yeah, that's something I can really appreciate, like, making kind of, you can tell a story, but that's different than actually writing a story. So like the type of thing that you're talking about. I've seen a lot of different artists do this, and I've done similar things. Like you both know that I've illustrated comics before.
Yeah.
And the ones that I've done successfully generally have been ones written by other people, because then I don't have to actually do the writing. Because there is an element to actual like authorship that it's a different skill set than what I actually have. When I'm like I've helped Carey a lot with trying to revise stories, or talking about themes or character development or appearances. But that's, at least to me, all like conceptual work where it's not really developing the story or developing necessarily what gets written on the page. It's helping to build the narrative, but really it's more of just building the world and building the themes that are involved with this project. Which I think you're exactly right. Like, this is very similar to like the drawing process for me and a lot of artists, where you start really rough, just kind of getting some ideas down, and then you use that to kind of shape where everything goes as you're building up an illustration, which certain people have used to great effect, like Steban Sejic, who's one of my favorite artists. He has this way of, if you've ever seen him illustrating a page, it's just like blobs of color that he'll just put down on a page that like barely read as anything, and then 20 minutes later you just see this level of detail in these just almost random blobs that he had started with, just kind of come alive as he kind of refines everything back.
Wow. He must do that digitally, I'd imagine, to erase color and stuff. Yeah. Or to meld it. That's fascinating.
Yeah. I imagine that's got to be harder to do with oil painting, but I have no reference since I've never painted in oil. I've been a digital artist, and traditionally I would just stick to graphite or charcoal, just black and white for the most part. I am not a traditional painter. I've done a little bit with acrylics here and there. I've tried watercolor, but it's just not my thing. And oil paints are prohibitively expensive. And so rather than invest in that, I invest a stupid amount of money into computer technology that can do all of that for me.
There you go.
Well, that's kind of a cool thing that I think that translates in a couple different ways to what Josh was talking about with like that fear of rewriting. Because for me, one of the cool things about modern technology, and the reason that books are so prolific now, or stories or blogs or whatever the fuck anybody wants to do, or art, is because digital mediums have made it easier to make things by giving you more tools, and also the ability to kind of backtrack. I was talking with a friend of mine about how if I'm very glad that I don't have to write on a typewriter, because I have a personal tendency with the ADHD brain to write what should be like the last sentence in a paragraph second.
Interesting.
Or I'll use a passive voice when it should be an active voice. Like, but I love the words in the sentence, and I just need to reorder it. I can do that in real time. If I'm adding something specifically, or like I'll paragraph order anything, like the way a chapter ends up getting structured, and I kind of like I go macro to micro, but the thing is, or micro to macro, kind of like while I'm writing. But the thing is, like, I have the opportunity to do that. Photoshop gives you all these really cool tools that you can kind of expand your palette on. Again, Will's teaching me how to use different brushes.
That's awesome.
And like, there's all these little tiny things that are in like Microsoft Word, which I write in, which for me, it's like I highlight or like I will change the color text on something that I know needs to be changed, but I don't have done yet, or like I need to expand this, adding notes into the margins. Or if I am comfortable with something and I'm going back for a rewrite and I'm rewriting a chapter in my base document, when I am making changes, all those changes are in a different color, specifically so I can, that second draft is like Dalmatian colored.
Yeah.
And I can read through it, and I'm gonna end up reading through the whole fucking thing about a billion times. Like I can actually like go through it and be like, all right, here's like the base that I was going for. Grammatical things don't count, but like here's the extra stuff I added. And sometimes it works, and like sometimes it works, and sometimes like, you know what, I like the first way better. So
yeah, it's a challenge for sure, because I feel like I'm afraid of getting callous to the story by reading it so many times. I don't want to get overly analytical with it. I want to let it flow still. So that's also a fear of mine with me, because when I repeat things, it's like it starts to get hard for me to stay engaged. Ooh, I got the yawns today. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
See, when I'm revising something, or when I'm trying to help somebody else revise something, because I know a few different writers, and I've collaborated, just kind of. I don't really want to say collaborated. I'm not really.
You've collaborated. I would like to call it collaboration.
Yeah.
I have helped to work through some story details with a few different writers, and sort of I'm exactly the opposite of you, where I really want to get into the minutia there, and I really want to overanalyze everything and just be like, okay, yeah, I see the themes. Is this what you're going for? Or what's the overall purpose of this? Why is this character wearing purple? Or I'll ask just kind of random questions that just kind of lead into other things, like, okay, I actually mentioned this to Carey a few minutes ago. How does that character hold a cup of coffee?
Oh, that's
do
cool.
They sit there and hold the handle? Do they like grab the actual coffee cup? Are they doing the, as Carey put it, the Nosferatu?
The Nosferatu.
There are two ways that I drink. That I drink basically anything. I because my hands are large, I either have the pinky out or I do the Nosferatu. So
nice.
And
that's that kind of minutia, that character building minutia that you were talking about.
Yeah. And those are like little things, like, what does this tell us about the character, and how does that relate to the plot? Or how does the growth of this character have an impact on the plot, or how does the plot have an impact on this character? What is the actual, like, what is the point of any of this happening? What are you trying to say? What are the background elements that are filling into this? Those like little details are things that I always love to dig into. That's one of the things I really love about like Game of Thrones, is like, if you take it at face value, you get your fantasy adventure with a whole lot of what seems like useless set dressing. But then like, if you dig into the things, you can kind of see a little bit of like plot hooks, like, oh, this character has lemons on the table. What does that mean? Because we know that this is taking place up north, and the Starks and the Lannisters aren't getting along and whatever, and how are they going to import lemons up there, and what's going on in the background? And yeah, like those
cool
type
get
of
into that kind of
little
stuff.
things are things that you can really dig into in something like Game of Thrones. But other books aren't necessarily as deep, and those things are, I don't tend to enjoy that type of thing, when there's not really something else that you can dig into, or you can't like explore other themes, like especially with a lot of popular books, or rather not necessarily just popular books, but popular media. The things that I find more more interesting are things that you can like dig in a little deeper. Like I just watched Encanto, and like there's a bunch of little background elements that really contribute to the theming of the story, that give you a lot of additional information about these characters that Disney put in there. And you know it's intentional because it's animated, and somebody actually had to go in there, and an artist had to rig every model and make sure that every detail gets shaded properly. Everything there is intentional.
Yeah, the very
And
particular character detail stuff, especially in Encanto, because I just watched that last night as well, or 2 nights ago as well, and like exactly what you're talking about. There is so much breadth and depth that has to go into the research of that minutia, because even though you're like a specific like that is a movie that does a really good job of being an ensemble flick, because it has the right level of characterization for each of the characters because they fit into archetypes. It's actually one of the things I remember like really liking about the first Avengers movie, where you have it is a excuse me, it is a very simple plot because it needs to be in order to give the characters depth.
Right.
And that was what made it so interesting, apart from it being like let's all pop champagne because we got all these characters in the same movie moment,
Yes.
because it was cool. And that's the kind of thing that I like about when you Josh, when you're telling me about your writing and your characters, because that first pass and the things that you've done to make sense, hold it together, are they're all very special to you, and they're internal. And the cool next step of that in the rewrite is being able to kind of like step toward it and step away, and just kind of let it percolate.
Yeah.
Because I'll have days like that when I'm writing or drawing or anything, where like I luckily have the luxury of being able to kind of follow the thing that interests me for the day.
Yeah.
But also, talking through characterization is a great way of like just weird little minutia.
Yeah.
Like Will's fucking thing for me that got me thinking about a whole bunch of different things, like what would Watcher's favorite meal be?
Ooh.
And I said, there's this rib sticking meal that I know that would be very easy to apply to a fantasy universe. And then it just became the why after that. Like, why is this a thing? And it's like, oh, it's an old family recipe, and it's simple, and it's simple, and it's easy to make when you're broke. And that added this level of thought that made me think about where the character came from, what his family does, and also like how that affects him going forward in his relationships with characters that are like in the story now.
So it seems like these questions we can ask about the character that might seem almost trivial, you can use to say, okay, but why? And you can build more roots for the character to make them more grounded.
Yeah,
I gotta do that more with my characters then. This is very helpful.
Yeah, and that's also something that I do a lot when I'm working on any type of character design or concept art. It's just adding, because if you just draw a character, like let's say you have just a male character, average height, in a suit, that doesn't really give you much. But let's say you add like a 5 o'clock shadow, or adding a pocket watch on a modern suit, or adding a like nail polish onto a hand, or adding a piercing onto a face. And what does this tell us about the character? Maybe the choice of shoes, like tennis shoes versus dress shoes. These are all giving just different points. And like if you add color, if instead of just like black suit, you make it pink, that this is a completely different character voice, and it tells us something very different about that character. And this all has to be from a visual standpoint of trying to get something, trying to read a story from just a single image, and what you can convey about this character, or how to tell a story without any words, like you were saying earlier. Just all of these little details go into just giving us a little more information about what's going on with this person or this world. And really, especially as you're going in and revising everything, adding on more little details just is able to tell a story that much more effectively.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, because one of the things about characters is that they don't usually exist in a vacuum. They exist in, that'd be a really weird, that'd be like a fucking Philip K. Dick story. The character in a vacuum. Yeah, like, well, this is boring. But they they exist in a world, they exist in a time, and they ping off the people around them. Like, characters are magnified or like drawn into the background by all the characters around them. And okay, so here's my favorite very small, very specific example. When I noticed the costume design in Jurassic World, not my favorite movie. I liked it. It was fun. But there was very specifically, you saw how Chris Pratt was dressed, and he was this former Navy SEAL, like very capable dude, right? Who trains velociraptors. And he's wearing a vest and a button-down hiking shirt, and he's got a knife on the back of his belt, and he's got it in a scout carry, which is like parallel, like it's along your belt line. So you could just, it's an easy draw. And he uses that. It's the Chekhov's gun thing. He uses the knife because you saw it. But here's the thing. Before he ever uses that knife, you see that he has it, and then he meets up with Vincent D'Onofrio, who is wearing khakis, a belt, a regular ass belt, a button down short sleeve shirt, and he's also got a knife. He's got a bigger knife, and for some fucking reason, this knife is hanging down off of his ass in a way that you couldn't draw it. There's literally no good way to draw that knife the way he had it hung, because it was hanging straight down from his belt. And he's sitting there, and he's trying to say to Chris Pratt, he's like, well, we're both dogs of war here, dude. And that's the point where it's like, that is an attention to detail and costuming. And the fact that this dude is a poser and specifically trying to pose he's trying to flex in response to Chris Pratt's character and having no idea how to actually do it. And that's a through line for that character, and that attention to detail and just the costuming is right there.
That's awesome.
Which is what makes it interesting. And that's one of the things I love about the way we play D&D, is so much, or D&D or tabletop in general, like so much of that is pinging off of the people around you to build this character based off of whatever backstory it is that you've come up with, and shifting that character to fit.
Yes. No, that adds so much more depth. It's got my wheels turning now of like, what are some other quirks of my characters that I've thought of that I didn't put on paper that I could add for the reader to latch onto? So that's exciting.
Yeah, it's a really fun thing to kind of like run down.
Yeah. And sometimes these are things that don't actually make it to the final piece, either in illustration or in rewriting, but they can have other implications and really help you kind of in your mind develop this character. And I've done that a few times where I will sometimes just I have a little character generator app on my phone where I just need something to draw for a warm up, and I'll have that just roll up a little D&D character, and it's like, okay, this race, this this gender, this class, this weapon, and it'll just go down the list of like just a little minutia, and I'll just most of that information doesn't make it onto the actual page, but I'll try to use that to kind of feed into this little character concept that I'll try to drop in like 30 minutes to an hour. Most of those I don't even like, they don't get posted anywhere. They just kind of get deleted because like they come out terribly. But it's just a really good little exercise of that type of story building in my head, of trying to kind of come up with, okay, what is the story here? What are we trying to convey? What is this telling us? And then trying to show that through a picture.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good exercise, man. That's awesome.
I've picked that up from Will, and he's heard me do this, where I have a sketch or I am working on something, and I am literally, like when I'm with him, like usually it's in my head, but when I'm hanging out with him, I'm speaking out loud and I'm saying this character would have this because this is something that they do, or like I get really into the concept. Like I have all these like pseudo demonic characters in The Devil of the Burned Peak. They're all Cambions. They're all half mortal, half demon. And they are very much based off of demons from the Ars Goetia. They don't all look like tieflings. So they are these like mishmashes of animals and like horrific kind of looking characters. And I was describing one to Will, and I said, I think this is this particular demon's brood, or like this is their patron. And it was a character that kind of had like this the one of the ways to depict this demon is essentially like a heron, like the bird, with a snake for a tail.
That's nifty.
And so I was like, I think this character's like this. I think like part of this is like he's actually got like a snake head that he can like see out of, like, and this guy's a scholar, like, and I just started like kind of describing like what this character's countenance would be like, and Will just started like sketching out a look that like combined what I was talking about with like all these little quirks of this character and where they came from, and added into like, well, this is, I think, like kind of the vibe of where you were talking about, because he ended up kind of looking like an Egyptian high priest.
Ooh.
And him helping out with that, I was like, oh, this guy runs this universe's version of the Library of Alexandria. Like, and like the bounce back and forth from that is like, I have this concept, here's something visual that informs something else that's in the concept, and all of this can be like written over time to expand on that. And that's what I like about rewriting, because I can come up with a real basic ass character and then slowly come up with their quirks and how they would act, and then it becomes easier and easier to justify how they would act, and then come up with the idea of where that comes from.
Yeah.
In my current work in progress, there's one character that really needs it, Shorshaka. Yeah, she really needs to be fleshed out more. So that this is getting me all excited to go back and find her quirks and find out what her roots are and really build her up as a character more.
Awesome. And dude, you know what another artist friend of mine told me to do, which this might be the only other social media I get on, Pinterest boards.
Ooh, yes.
She is a multimedia artist. Like, she does a lot of like collages and stuff, but she builds Pinterest boards that are like, this is everything that reminds me of this thing I want to make.
Yeah.
And then you have like visual references. So even if you don't like, even if you don't want to sketch it or paint it or draw it, you can have all these things. It's like, oh, Kate Beckinsale and a 3-headed mace and a greyhound. Cool. I know what we can do with this. Like,
I did that for my Lost Colony screenplay. I made a mood board. I just saved photos on my phone that had the right vibe, and keep a little folder in my phone of Lost Colony reference art. You know,
I love that. I used to have a wall when I was first coming up with like something that I wanted to make into a book or a cartoon. I had been like slowly sketching things over time, or like keeping really small notes. and I just took a wall and I finally drew like a map, and then I started like tacking things to it with like the thread and doing what people do for like full storyboards.
That's
Even
awesome.
though I didn't have like a story mapped out, I knew this all occurred in like the same general universe,
Mhm.
and mapping that out really helped.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I think like that is kind of the beauty of rewriting is like when you have that first copy there, you have kind of like the bigger story beats, and then it's just going back in and not just filling in detail, but now that you know where everything is going, you can kind of grab the details that are going to be contributing to that overall arc that you're trying to aim for now that
Mhm.
you have a little bit more knowledge, you can kind of fill in those different gaps of detail to make everything that much more interesting for the observer when they're trying to when they're actually going in and experiencing this. um as the author, you have that big overview, but your readers coming in for the first time, and so now you get to give them all of these this detail that they get to experience like the full effect of it as they're going through this without necessarily knowing where any of this is going.
Exactly.
And when you get to see that, it's so cool. I'm a huge nerd for behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah.
I love it. If you ever want to listen to some of the best DVD commentary, any Guillermo del Toro film,
Mm.
listen to his actors fucking talking about it, because you hear how much they're like, oh yeah, Guillermo was a nut for this, and he's so passionate. Like, just watch the first Hellboy movie, and you're hearing fucking Ron Perlman and Doug Jones and Selma Blair bullshit while they're watching the movie, but they're also talking about all the shit that Guillermo does that is just like the coolest stuff. And I was thinking about that in terms of story. One of the coolest things about um doing this, or they're like coming up with like these things about a character, is that if you don't like it, you can change it.
Yeah.
Like I found out, and this is a very, very dumb example, but I was trying to like cast what Watcher's voice was like in my head, my main character. And I love Sean Connery.
Yeah.
But there is no way to do something that sounds kind of like Sean Connery.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
If it sounds a bit like Sean Connery, it's a Sean Connery impression.
Yes.
So I had to backtrack from that, because like, well, there's nobody, like there's literally no voice. Like, it doesn't matter how good a voice actor is, even if they did a perfect Sean Connery, it's going to sound like they're doing a Sean Connery impression.
Yeah. He's
So I
too
backtracked.
iconic. He's too iconic.
Yeah.
Way too iconic, exactly. So or the guys in Critical Role talk about this, like, yeah, the Austrian accent is like both catnip and kryptonite for a voice actor.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is kind of an interesting thing, because I know you do this a lot. I don't know if Josh does, of when you're trying to write a character, like do you cast in your head who plays that character at all?
I used to, and now I tend to not do that as much. But sometimes I do.
That why'd you shift?
I think I wanted to describe characters that were more an amalgamation of, yeah, I just wanted to describe them from the ground up more, instead of relying on, because it wasn't so much, I was picking an actor, but I was also picking a character that actor had played and shifting them from there.
Okay, you're
So I
picking
wanted
a
to have,
role.
exactly. So I wanted to have even more dynamicism. Like in my current book, Galgathor's Gambit, I had an actor in mind for the character Draw, and then as I wrote the character, he shifted even further from that role. So it became something entirely new, but I sometimes will use him as a springboard. But since I've grown as a writer, I've moved away from using actors as a baseline like that,
So I like that. My cheat for that is as far as the look goes, it's completely different, but I cast a voice actor.
Yeah.
I imagine that it's animated and that I get to have full control of what a character looks like and everything. and I will say this is a voice actor because this is a voice actor that fits the tone
That's cool.
for how this character talks and like their intonation, or because there's certain voices there, like because voice acting, the depth of the acting that goes into it is fascinating to me.
Yeah.
And the way people the way people can have range, but also have like when people pick up different tones and accents, and they factor that into, it's the same thing we're talking about with like, this is what a character would wear to present themselves. Like, this is how a character would talk, because this is how they've learned to speak over time. And I find that fun for building character quirks,
Yeah.
specifically, or like their interactions. Like part of Watcher is very much based off of the um I am so extroverted that I have to rein that back in, because that frightens people isn't the right term, but like it just like it intimidates people. Like I am so extroverted that if I cut loose, people just think I'm fucking with them. Like that's a very common thing with me. And so I've had to learn, the social interaction skill of, let's stop and listen. Introducing myself is great. That's always, but like, let's reel back. Let's talk to these people and just kind of like feel out the group. And what's come out of that for me has been this level of like observance of others, and like where they are in a conversation, kind of like empathically, because I kind of like I kind of want everybody to have a good time. So that's kind of a thing for me. And factoring that into Watcher was interesting, because that's an aspect that I got to put into a main character that for him comes from a completely different place of, this is what this guy looks like. This is what he grew up around. This is what he went from one he went from one culture in the same country to a different culture in the same country. And that's where I like, personally, that's where I had the big breakthrough when I was talking with Will. I was like, these characters have been mostly archetypal, but now here's what I think they really are, because I can add these mannerisms, and it does a great job of like, I have a great baseline of an archetype, and I also have I have a thing that makes them different and unique, and it makes their personalities feel more real and human to me.
That's awesome. That's a really cool way to approach it.
Thank you.
Hopefully your cat is so cute.
Yeah,
he's just staring off into the sunlight.
He's just chilling. I've got a bagel back here.
Yeah. Hi, Havoc.
He's like
sleepy boy.
I'm so abused all the time.
Just getting taken for walks and getting all this attention.
Yeah.
Yeah, Moose decided that she needed to contribute to the conversation.
Yes, it's a good contribution. She's a wise kitty.
It's a good cat.
Well, this is really motivating for me to go back and like add more depth to my characters. It's I got my creative juices flowing.
Yeah, man. And like there's all that organic shit that you can just like pop into that character. That's going to be, I think it's going to be fun. I'm excited to read where this, hopefully where this conversation takes your characters, because I'm still picking through Galgathor. So
ooh, thank you. Yeah, no, it very much pulls off of our Dungeons and Dragons, like you mentioned earlier, where as a DM, if someone asked me, okay, if you ask me a question about an NPC, like, oh, how do they, what food do they order, or what kind of clothes do they wear? I can bullshit something real quick, but then that does inform how I'm going to play the character and makes them more impactful to the players. And so I've just got to learn to do that with my characters and my books,
Yeah, and I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit. I know we're wrapping up and everything. I don't think you give yourself enough credit for how much world building you do in the back of your head.
Oh, thank you.
Because you have such a breadth of knowledge about the world that you made, that you're not just bullshitting something. You're not pulling something, like you're not pulling out a random table on Wikipedia, you're pretty informed as to what the general culture in an area is like. So you like, even unconsciously, you're coming up with something that makes sense for a character, even if they're an NPC.
You're right.
You know?
Thank you. That is true.
Exactly. I very much appreciate the way that you do that. And I think your characterization is going to be really cool coming off of that.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, guys, this was a really good conversation. I learned a ton, and I've got a great fresh perspective going into my rewrites. So
did I, actually. I've had a lot of fun with this one.
Yeah. Will, thank you so much.
Sure.
Yeah. You guys are great. This has been a great podcast. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording, but if anyone who's listening wants to like, share, and comment on what you want to see in future podcast topics, we'd love to have your suggestions.
Oh yeah, shoot us a topic, because we can spin it out into an hour.
We sure can.
Of talking about rewriting or what the fuck ever, because we're learning it too.
It's true. And go on Instagram and follow Will Shaw Art. Do it.
Please do.
And Josh Lindquist.
BP.
Is it just Josh Lindquist?
No, it's Josh Lindquist BP, which is Burnham Wood Productions, my original production company when I used to make YouTube videos back as a kid on Burnham Wood Drive. That's where it comes from. Not what is it? British Petroleum.
Oh,
not that.
Josh Lindquist of British Petroleum. By the way, to all the listeners, here's what I would like very much for you to do. Gather up some money and commission either Josh or Will, or both of them at the same time, to write the pornography you want to see in the world.
Yes. Yes.
And please give them money for that. So I can see their faces light up when they have to write whatever it is that falls out of your head.
Yes, I do take commissions, and I will draw just about anything for money.
I will write just about anything for money. So
the just about is very key with both of those. But
actually, no, I'm desperate. I will write anything for money. There is no just about. It is anything.
Isolate that. All right, director. Yes, we got him.
We got him.
That is it. I've been an NSA agent the whole time.
I will write your anti-American propaganda. Yes, ISIS, how much do you pay? No, I'm just kidding.
No.
Let's be honest, it's China with the money.
Yeah.
Yes. And I will gladly take it because I am desperate. LA is expensive, man.
It is.
Yeah. So is Denver.
Yeah, you're right.
It's true.
Not quite as bad as LA. But I still have some standards.
Some. You're like, I will draw the tentacle penis, but only once.
Oh yeah, that's not a problem.
Well, you've all heard it straight from us. We are desperate and we'll take your money for whatever you'd like. Thank you for tuning in to Nerds and Friends. This has been an awesome podcast.
Hi, Joe.